Peace and blessings, everybody. I'm happy to be moderating this great virtual event to have a real robust discussion around solitary confinement and all of the different issues that affect our communities and how they show up with this great panel. But before I begin, I have to introduce myself as the moderator of this. I'm Antonio Travis, a New Orleans native and organizer for Families and Friends of Louisiana's incarcerated children. And I come to you as a person impacted, a person who experienced school pushout when I was in high school and didn't experience solitary confinement, but was in a school that was very much moved in a way that I felt like the prison system had a lot of influence on, and it led me to this great work that I do today. And so, before I jump in and introduce my great panelists, I do want to shout out some great organizations that are that played a instrumental piece in organizing this Unlock the Box campaign, which is a national campaign against solitary confinement. No Kids in Prison, which is a national network supporting statewide campaigns to end youth incarceration. And we're also being sponsored by the Juvenile Justice Delinquency and Prevention Act. And this is all in partnership with YJAM because it is Justice Action Awareness Month. And so we're doing this during this great time. And so before I go any further, I will be remiss to not give the floor to these great people who are here today. And so I want to pass it to the panelists, and I want you guys to introduce yourselves. But I also want you to give one or two sentences on why the conversation about youth justice is important. Just one or two, though, because we're gonna have a lot of time to pack in. So introduce yourself and give us one or two sentences on why you believe youth justice is important. And I'll pass it to Kaprice. Kaprice, lead us.
How we doing? My name is Caprice Daniels. I am originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. I now study social policy pre-law at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. And I believe that youth justice is important because as somebody like Antonio who's directly impacted by the system, if there's a lack of awareness on a community level, but also on a youth level about how the system is directly impacting them and how we can maneuver around that, the system will continue to perpetuate the same issues and problems that we see that affect the people like me and Antonio.
And so, Caprice, what I want you to do is pass it. I want you to pass the baton to whoever you want, popcorn, and however you want to do it, but pass it to somebody.
I'll pass the baton to Kelton.
Oh, my name is Kelton Gilbert. I'm from Connecticut, and for me, the youth, like growing up, I heard the youth was always our future and stuff. So how can we leave our future in a cell or locked away somewhere where no one could talk to them, no one could see them? So I just believe that if our youth is truly our future, then we should treat them as such and uplift them every step of the way, even when they make mistakes. And I'll pass it to Cameron.
Hi, my name is Cameron Dumas. I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm a youth leader with Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. And the reason why I believe this fight and this conversation is important is because we some people are unaware of how it impacts them directly or indirectly, and how it impacts our youth and their futures. And in order for our youth now to have positive development, we must bring this awareness to the front fold and actually fight this fight, knowing that mass incarceration and solitary confinement is not something that we want to see our young people in. So thank you for having me here today, and I'll pass it to Evie.
All right. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation as well. My name is Evie Soap, and I'm coming to you from Florida. I am an art therapist providing services on the inside. And as of now, our program consists of 4 art therapists working in 9 institutions across the state of Florida. And we primarily work with individuals under the age of 22 working towards their GED. And what I can bring to this conversation is additional insight into the experiences of those incarcerated, as well as staff working on the inside. So this will provide hopefully some perspective to the conversation, and also talk about the challenges of benefits of art therapy services in these settings. And do we have Eddie left?
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. This is my first virtual event. My name is Heriberto de Leon. If you can't pronounce that, you can just call me Eddie. I have a lived experience of over 40 years in the system. I just recently did a sentence of 32 years and 9 months. I've been currently out for the last 6 months. And in that time, I've been working with nonprofits. Right now, I work with the FCC, Full Citizens Coalition. The mission is to undo the unjust harms of felon disenfranchisement. And I believe solitary confinement must end, because I was part of that. I experienced it. And it's a thing where you thought it was normal, and it's really not. I'm learning that now at an older age, and I believe it just has to stop.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody for giving that insight. And so just kind of we're talking about youth, right? We're talking about youth in solitary confinement, but how do we define youth? And I think it's important for us to define that for this conversation. And so I think when we speak of youth, we're talking about youth 25 and under, and there's a reason why. And not to get all too scientifically and all that, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the word wrong, but we really have to break this down so people understand why this age group is so essential. And so without like boring everybody, I'll just give you the basics. Young people, 25 and under, right? Their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for complex decision-making, impulse control, and future planning, continues to develop significantly throughout their adolescence and isn't fully mature to around the age of 25, right? Meaning individuals in this age range is still experiencing significant brain development and may exhibit behaviors associated with immaturity, right? That's very key to lock in on. These are crucial years of young people's lives. So just keep that framework in mind when we're thinking about young people and why it's so important to define that age range. But to ground us in the work today, Cameron is going to share a spoken word poem with us. Cameron, please, if you could take the floor and share your spoken word with us. We are so delighted to see what you got for us.
Thank you, Brother Antonio. I appreciate that very much. Yes, to ground us in the work today, I just wanted to share a spoken word poem. I'll just go ahead and jump straight into it. It's called These Four Walls. No direction, no guidance. Places to go, silence. The perception of my complexion brings me to the intersection with the one who stands in black and blue, whose hands aren't black, but no hue. Here they go again, locking up a brother. But there could be no other way. Nah, not with my complexion. This is fate. In here, I'm not listened to. I'm silenced. Locked in a state of solitary confinement can have you feeling that way. Hopeless, defeated, mistreated, abused, and forgotten. Left to rotten. Beyond my wildest dreams. I thought those was meant for free people. I call out, CO, can I get a no? Can I call my no? I'm going crazy. So, dehumanized and criminalized. I look down at myself. Why should I be surprised? I hear my ancestors on both sides fighting for my justly freedom. From these confining walls, these haunted halls that will plague for all in all these years to come, my brothers and sisters. Will I be free? Society holds on to the same traditions my ancestors faced. So why me? Dedicated to Marcellus Williams.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you. We appreciate that. Do any of the panelists have any like in real time reaction? I would call on. I don't want to call on people, put you on the spot, but if any of you have like reactions to what Cameron just said, please share with us. Like, what's your feelings? What did that bring up for you? If it brought up anything.
Okay, I can share. First of all, Cameron, that was so beautiful. That was so beautiful. It really touched my heart. I was like, whew, it's too early in the call for me to be crying. But I really enjoyed the part where you talked about how freedom is never really freedom, and then how if you look down at your skin color, like this is our fate. And because right now, like my major is social policy, so we're exploring the different ways in which authors or even activists talk about how freedom is not freedom, and how there's a system, like you said, a system that which we live, and it's like we fight as activists every day, and like we continue to put that best foot forward because we know that our ancestors fought for freedom and that we're more free than our ancestors, but it still looks like a form of punishment. So it was deep.
Thank you. I
It was
appreciate
deep.
that,
It was
Caprice.
deep. It was deep. Anybody have any other reactions to Cameron's poem? And we together, we together. We're gonna have again some real deep conversations, and I do want to make sure I add to this because I forgot to give this disclaimer in the beginning. We are having a raw conversation. This conversation is going to be raw, and excuse me for not giving like a trigger warning of sorts for folks. We're tackling a very like complex, layered conversation that can make people uncomfortable. So I do want to give that trigger warning before we continue. Um, but I do want to talk about before we talk about like some of the challenges young people face. Cameron, do you what were the themes that you thought of when you was making that spoken word?
Yeah, as a person who's not directly impacted by actually being in solitary confinement, I used themes and stories that I've heard from actual youth who have been impacted directly. So I wanted to make sure that I kept that in mind and kept keeping those voices and those stories on the forefront because that's important in this work, amplifying the voices of the experience. So that was my main theme. So taking the work that I've heard from people that I've known.
Thank you, Cam. We appreciate that. And so, like, let's just keep the conversation going. And remember, like, we're here to have this real conversation for people and really ground people in what's really happening from all of these different perspectives. And so, when we talk about challenges young people face in the youth justice system, how does it relate to you personally, like through personal experience? For anybody like Kelton, I'll start with you. Like, when you think about the youth justice system, like how does it relate to you on a personal level?
Personal level, for me, I was arrested at 18 and I did a little over 2 years. And then I spent time in the halfway, but I was 20 years old and the next person in my age was 39. So I was just a lot younger than my surrounding. And what's it called? For me, it was just like the only help I had was my mother. I didn't get no lawyer talk. They didn't want to talk to me. I didn't have no access to information. And it's just like I didn't know what was going on. So I was just having faith that things would work out. And I just don't think this should be a faith thing. This should be there's what's going to happen. This is the plan, the communication, everything that should be put together. And it's not like you can't get the access. It's just more if you have the money, you get the access. And I just feel like for our youth, we should just give them that access.
And I want to open that up to anybody. Kelton spoke on lack of access, right? Lack of access and how it related to him personally. And I just want to like open that up for the rest of the panel. Um, how does that make you, like if anyone who wants to speak to that question and give us some insight, the floor is open. And I'll call on people if I have to.
Yeah, I'll
But
go.
go ahead.
I would say for mine, because there's many points of like how like this work, like how I've experienced it. But one point for me is like lack of awareness, like especially when it comes like to the school to prison pipeline. I wasn't aware until I gotten older how being in detention or the type of policies or strict policies that they placed in school, how that was a funnel into the prison pipeline, even if I haven't personally been directed in that light, or if I've seen like my peers actually go in and out of jail. So yeah, along to go with the lack of access is also a lack of awareness as well.
Brother Eddie, Evie, do y'all have any feelings about um, the school to prison pipeline. Can y'all define, if either Evie, I'll ask you, and then Brother Eddie, I want you to come back and then like put some sprinkles on it for us. Evie, if you can you define what the school to prison pipeline is for folks that don't understand?
Well, I guess the way that I would describe that, and I'm speaking from limited experience, it doesn't touch me personally, at least that awareness piece comes in too. Of course, there are things that have happened in my life where I didn't recognize what was really happening. And so coming into this work and working with people incarcerated now professionally for 5 years, I recognize how it doesn't start in prison. It starts so much earlier than that. So many of the people that I work with come from broken homes. They have family members in prison. There's experiences of abuse and neglect. There's experiences with oppression and not being able to access what they need and get the help that they need coming into this experience. So it happens much sooner than just prison. And then it's perpetuated through the experience of prison, not being able to get their needs met, and not being able to speak out, not being able to access services. And it just continues as they go through their incarceration. So it's something that starts very early on with not being able to speak out. And I'm reminded of Cameron's poem about being silenced. And that is very much the experience, both internally and externally, not feeling like I can speak out because people aren't going to listen. And then having the experience with people in positions of authority, not listening or dismissing or saying, no, no, no. And so it's a very serious issue, and there needs to be more access to services inside to try and mitigate that and get those needs met.
Thank you, Evie. Brother Eddie, now Evie just baked that beautiful cake right there. Like I really want you, because you're impacted, right? And you spoke a little bit earlier about like your like lived experience inside. When we talk about the school to prison pipeline, can you add to what Evie said, but also speaking from personal experience, kind of, if you can, like, did things start from an earlier place for you that kind of led you down this trajectory? If you can, and I'll give you the floor to expound upon that however you need to.
So it does start at an early age. As soon as you hear people and see people doing things, you start learning. For me, my neighborhood was a very poor neighborhood, and a lot of the people around me were arrested. For me, the jail to prison pipeline was a rite of passage. You were the one that was not included in the community that you lived in, because there was many people that their fathers weren't around, some mothers weren't around, their brothers were incarcerated, and you heard this from a young age. I went to a juvenile justice event maybe 2 months after I got out, and a father spoke. And the father was upset because there was many social workers speaking. And when he got up, he said, "You're not connecting with me." The main thing that got me, that I felt like I kind of bonded with him, was he said, "There's no drugs in my family. Nobody went to jail. They raised them in a good place." Yet one day he came home and he wasn't that loving little kid. He wouldn't listen to me. He was doing whatever he wanted. He started getting arrested. And this just happened out the blue. And I related with that because my family, even though I was in those bad neighborhoods, I still felt outside the box. You know what I mean? And I started doing the same thing that all those other individuals started doing. So it was normal.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you. And before we continue to move the conversation forward, I have to make sure I give space to Kaprice and Cameron. Kaprice, I know you recently graduated high school. Cameron, I know you went to school for this stuff. And Kelton, again, like you kind of spoke on this when you were speaking earlier about how things started for you. But if y'all want to quickly just, what's the school to prison pipeline? What is that? What define that for us, Kaprice? In your own words.
Okay, before I start my definition, Eddie, you said it's like a rite of passage. And I was like, wow, like I never thought about it like that. But I feel like most kids in urban neighborhoods feel like that's a rite of passage. And this, okay, now this is like leading on to how I got impacted. So basically, my all of my brothers and all of most of the men in my family went to jail before they graduated high school. One of my brothers, he actually went to jail while he was in the 10th grade and like had to make up classes while he was in the 10th grade at my school. But hold on, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to see where I was going with that. Oh yeah, so walk when it comes to it being a rite of passage, it was like everybody around you was in this sort of street life or in this we running from the cops or in this, and this also goes back to the previous conversations about like lack of awareness and how lack of awareness goes along with lack of attention, because if you're not aware of something you're not going to be attentive to it. But like you said, when it's a rite of passage, you're attentive to, okay, like this is the way of life, like this is the how we're supposed to do it. This is how everybody in the community do it. Like you said, people daddies, my daddy wasn't in my life for a period of time while I was in school because he was incarcerated. So it's like that rite of passage, it just passed down from generation to generation. But when it comes to why I do the work and the school to prison pipeline, is because I can see like from a young age that it starts in school. Like it starts how, like you said, it starts how we interact with each other. It starts with how the school disciplinarians interact with us, and then it goes on to, okay, what am I doing once I get out of these school walls, and how is the disciplinarian in the school similar to the dean in the ward in the jailhouse. um and Antonio, I'm happy that you brought up I'm in school, because school, so often school was seen as the way out. Like, okay, I'm gonna go to school and I'm gonna get far away from this, and I'm just never gonna look back. But I had a humbling experience when I came to school, and it was like, okay, just because I'm out of the immediate environment, don't mean that it was the way out, because my family is still in that rite of passage. Like, my family is still living those same lives because they don't have the awareness and they don't have the education and the platforms like these. That was sorry.
Appreciate that, Caprice. Cameron, send us home before we get into the next part of our conversation.
Yeah, yeah, just to wrap everything up what everybody said, the school to prison pipeline is basically like what everything that everybody said. It's a disproportionate tendency of seeing minors and young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds become incarcerated due to harsh school policies and municipal practices. So it involves things like suspensions, referrals, and even all the way to law enforcement, because we know that a lot of schools have SROs, which is school resource officers, and that helps funnels youth out of public education and into the juvenile legal system, which can include things like missing class, not completing high school, higher truancy, things in that nature. So yeah, it's a real issue, and it's very systemic. And like Eddie says, as soon as you're able to live, breathe, respond, and actually understand what's going on and actually and replicate what people doing, which is very young, you're impacted. It can start as little as kindergarten. So
Mm. Appreciate that, Cam. And just to kind of summarize all that, like Evie said, like even like Cam, you gave a good definition of how schools push kids right into the school to prison pipeline. Evie was talking about like even outside of schools, this thing is happening. Eddie saying the same thing. Caprice saying the same thing. Like everybody, Kelton, y'all all saying the same things. Like we call it the school to prison pipeline, but these pipelines, it's so many different ways and entry points, right? That they're pushing our community members into this pipeline, and y'all are doing a good job of talking about that, which leads us into our next piece of the conversation, the system. We talked about the schools, like the school system, for example, right? Like plays a role into that. Like, and so we're gonna watch a video called Another Wasted Life. It's a music video, and it's a music video that was written by Kalief Browder. And people who are not familiar with Kalief Browder was 16 when he was sent to Rikers Island without a trial, accused of stealing a backpack. Um, a song written, yeah, it was a song. I'm sorry, I said a song written by Kalief Browder. It's written about Kalief Browder. Excuse me. It was written about Kalief Browder, not by Kalief Browder. But it was it's based around like his story, like and how he was accused of stealing a backpack and spent over 700 days in solitary confinement. He spent over 700 days in solitary. I want to say that again for people. He spent over 700 days in solitary confinement and was isolated for 23 hours a day. And when he left, his life was taken by suicide 2 years later. And so his story is just a reminder of how devastating long-term effects on those subjected to solitary confinement can be, right? And how a system is failing us, and it continues to fail us. And we put these resources and these practices that harm our communities and not in the things that help it. And so I do want to get the Kalief Browder, another wasted life music video pulled up that was inspired by Kalief Browder. So yeah, that was a powerful video. Definitely a video that I like. I'm happy I seen it. It's my first time seeing it. Real powerful video. Kelton, I call on you, Kelton, and you can pass it freely to whoever you want to. But just to, it's a kind of a broad question. Like, what resonated about the video to you? Like, how did that video, if any, have any type of impact on you from watching it?
Well, excuse me, but for me, I think the wasted life part really got to me because when I was in jail, there was just people my age coming in and out of jail. And I was only there for a little over 2 years, but I've seen the same people come in 6 different times. I've seen people come in 4 different times and then go home, and then I hear they died a week later. So it's just like they had like, it's a waste because it's like we could have been home, we could have been free, we could be living, doing better. Like you had a plan to go home and do better, then you get killed. And it's just like the idea of that kind of just hit me kind of hard. And I'll pass it to Eddie.
Yeah, that was very frustrating. The words that hit me are like Mango's Truths, Cloudy, Kaprice, torture, confines, wasted life, damaged goods. I guarantee you when they got sentenced, the judge probably said something, as he said in my case and many others that I know, before they sentence you, you have no redeeming qualities. Setting the stage to give you these long sentences. Yeah, those words just, like I kind of held my breath the whole time, Yeah, it was powerful.
Appreciate that. And always remember, like, and I just want to recenter us again. It's a real tough conversation, real raw conversation. And it's for audience members and panelists. If you need a moment to breathe, please breathe. Do what you have to do. Take care of yourself. Evie, can you did anything about the video resonate with you that you would like to share with us?
Yes, absolutely. It is really heavy to see and to even get a glimpse of what it must be like being in a situation where you're alone and left with your own thoughts and your own feelings, and getting those messages from society that your life has no value and you're not deserving of help and attention and care. That is what is going on with people who are left in those situations. And that just perpetuates those feelings of guilt, of shame, of hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness. And that is just more of the problem. And this video, it focused on people who are wrongfully convicted, with this idea that, of course, these people need help and they don't need to be there in the first place. But then there's also people who have committed the crime, who are doing the time, but they're still deserving of effective services and care and an opportunity for a better life. And that is equally as important. because their life isn't a waste, and it just, by virtue of being human, your life has value. And I believe people need to be reminded of that, because it's not just about the people inside, but it's also the connection to our larger society. Like, most of these people are getting out, and people who are in solitary confinement or in isolation have worse outcomes than people in open population. And they're going to get out there and they're going to touch other people's lives. And how can you expect someone to get out and do better if they've experienced nothing but hurt and pain? It just does not make sense.
Appreciate that, Evie. Cameron, how did it resonate with you?
Yeah, pretty much similar to you, Antonio. I really let that be the first time that I really actually sat there and watched the video completely fully. So like, it was definitely very impactful. The one thing that definitely stuck out to me was when she was singing and she said, "Returned home but damaged goods," and it just reminded me of a conversation that I had the other day with this guy, and we was talking about the idea of trust. And he was like, there was like this little wine glass in front of us, and he said, if I drop this wine glass and I try to put it back together, it'll be in that same safe, but it won't be perfect. Once you break trust, it's always broken. So it reminds me of like, the trust that people maybe have used to have in the system, and after seeing it failed us so many times over and over again, there's no way that trust can ever really be rebuilt. And it's just very impactful because like 500 years, 500 years of life wasted. You know how many generations that is? And just to see it in that light and to see it that way, it was just crazy. I'll pass it.
I appreciate that, Cam. Kaprice, take us home. How did it resonate with you?
I think like the video resonated, but all your responses, I'm so happy to go last on this one because everybody's responses resonated. Okay, to address who I'm address first because it was a lot. Okay, we can start with Kelton. Kelton, when you said people like you seen the boys come into prison and then or come into jail and then leave, and then like a couple months later they did, or like a couple months later like something happened to them, it resonates so deeply because so many of my friends like growing up going to high school, like they'll go to jail, then they'll get out of jail, and like to even to your point, they still have that same anger and that same hurt and that same pain because now the one thing that they were battling with before that made them act out of impulse and get in trouble in the first place is amplified and not is not safe or protected. And then I feel like, Cameron, that goes into what you said about trust. Like if they can't trust that when they make a small mistake that they're going to be okay and that their time isn't going to be wasted or stolen from them, it's like, why would I trust that if I do something else that y'all going to care? Like why would I trust that you gonna care if I actually really didn't mean to do that? So like back to the original point of Kelton, like it goes into, okay, I'm going home, but now they just looking at me more of a troubled child. Like now it's like, oh, he went to jail, like but not understanding that they need help, so they go back into that same system and that same game that everybody playing in the streets, and it'd be like, now we going to funeral after funeral, month after month. um so yeah, that's what I took from it. And Cameron, when you said wasted time and 500 years, that instantly took me back to slavery. That instantly was like, dang, like they just still in time, but in a different form now.
Thank you, Capri. I appreciate that, Capri. You tell me what high school. I gotta find out what high school you went to, where you from, because you be talking that good stuff. Before we move on to the next piece of the conversation, though, I just want y'all to not briefly, but if you could like kind of summarize your feelings around this particular topic, because I think it's important for people to know where you stand and how you feel. What does everything that you've seen and what you know as a person with personal experience or as a justice involved advocate, what does all of this say about our youth justice system as a whole? And Kelton, I'm gonna come back to you and start with you. What does all of this to you say about our youth justice system as a whole?
Everything I feel like is like the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there's like a lot of good people like The ones that are on the video call with right now, trying to put it into work. The bad is just the people who they don't want no change really. It don't affect them personally, even though they hear the stories. It's not their everyday life, and it's just some people get worse. Like they're just the ones like, listen, we're gonna throw them in here. We're gonna make this money. This is a business, not like human laws. And like she said with slavery, it was a business. They wasn't people. Now jail, everyone in jail, they're not people. They're just another check for another bad, basically. And I'll pass it to Evie.
I would say with these conversations, my mind sort of spins because whenever I think it's related to one thing, that connects it to something else, and then something else, and then something else, which makes it systemic. But where my mind goes is that youth justice and it just isn't prioritized. And our society as a whole doesn't value preventative care and making sure people have the support that they need early on when they're young children. And that just continues through the system. Then in schools where teachers don't have the support they need and students don't have the support they need, if they're not getting the education they need or the attention that they need, the tutoring, etc. And then moving on to prisons don't have the resources they need to meet the needs. So it's just our values in our country are backwards, and we're not prioritizing people as we should.
Appreciate that, Evie. Cameron, what you feel about our youth justice system as a whole?
Yeah, just to finish off of what Evie said, we're not prioritizing people. I feel like we're not prioritizing people, we're prioritizing numbers. Definitely for sure. When it comes to like for example, like in Louisiana, it takes over $100,000 just to incarcerate a youth, but it only takes half of that to actually give that youth education. So I definitely agree with that. We're not prioritizing their actual humanity. We're just prioritizing the number value behind it. But also, it just reminds me of how much that the system is actually failing at the end of the day. Yeah. Eddie, you're
I
on
think
mute, Eddie.
you're on mute, Eddie. You're on mute.
Okay, sorry.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. The juvenile justice, prisons, the court systems, they're all broken. The training that went into training all the people that run these organizations, they're stuck with them now. When prisons became a high booming thing in the 80s and 90s, we trained people a certain way to deal with the juveniles, with the people that were going into adult prisons, and so on. And those people, their families entered that same type of system, so that they learned a tradition that's now hard to be broken. I think now with justice reform and everything, you have to start listening to the people that have been impacted because they lived it. And even with that, you constantly got to be an activist on this because those people still believe, no, we're still doing the right thing. It's just the people that are coming in are the problem. So, yeah, there's many pieces to the puzzle to this, and they all got to be worked on.
Kaprice, how you feel about our youth justice system?
I agree with everybody else. But Eddie, you brought up a good point because I'm a social policy major, so they actually like difference between what I do and like a political science major. A political science student will actually like sit and try to understand why the government works. But social policy, it actually like they actually teach us how policies are implemented into the world and like into the community. So when it comes to training, I 100% agree. Like it's not, I think most people look at legislation like it's a flat out thing, but it's actually like, okay, the legislators in the Senate, they implement these policies and they pass these policies, but like the implementation process is really, really long. And when we get to those blue collar on the field workers like the wardens and the police on the street. They're not caring about like everybody else said, they're not caring about a broader agenda. They're not caring about a community. They're caring about a dollar sign. They're caring about how many cells are filled up. They're not caring about the emotional needs of people. And to Cameron, to your point about the education, that statistic, I was like, oh, like wow. But like when you sit back, like the prison system makes more than the Louisiana education system, and our education continues to fail. But we continue to see our brothers and our cousins in these cells.
Yep, that's true. And Cam, it's like a fraction. Like it costs like up to like I want to say like $20,000 or $30,000 to educate one student, and over like $100,000 to incarcerate them. So the money, the disparity is crazy. But I want to like kind of lead us into another piece of this conversation that we've already we've touched on it with the conversations we had already, and that's solitary confinement, right? And I just want to like for the audience, people, we really want to like get understanding. So we're gonna play a video. But before we get into the video, just understand that solitary confinement is torture and often causes devastating effects on young people's mental and physical health, right? And so we're going to check out this poem written by a person in solitary called "Staring at a Wall." So let's pull that up.
Wall by Curtis. I was warned there'd be times like these, but nothing could have prepared me for Dr. Swartz, who comes around once a week, peeking in my cell like he knows me better than I know myself. I'll bet he gets a kick out of seeing a 22-year-old who has been locked away in a cell since he was 16, who has 30 more to go if a blessing doesn't come through this damn wall that he's been staring at for the past 6 hours. I often come to this wall to somewhat free my mind, or to drown out my annoying cellie, who can't stop talking about his boring relationship with his girlfriend. He can't seem to stop fighting, even though she calls the cops on him every time. Or sometimes when the lights go out and the prison ruckus is done for the day, I guess to seek mental refuge from this place. Other times just to reflect on what life was like before 23 and 1, when it was cookouts, huggies, and hamburgers. Yeah, that always brings a smile to my face. Lately, that's been the routine. I start reflecting and end up with a smile, staring at this damn wall. Then here comes this doctor, wanting to know why I'm sitting here smiling at the wall. I give him the usual nothing, but to be honest, I smile to keep from crying. Wall.
Smile to keep from crying. That was a good one. Before while y'all sit with that, before we like have the conversation that we're going to have around solitary confinement. If you could describe solitary confinement or solitary in one word, what would you call it? If you could describe it in one word, what would you call it? And I'm going to start with Kaprice.
Torture. And I'll pass the baton to Evie.
I would say psychological. Let's go to Cameron.
Tormenting. Kelton.
Cold. Eddie.
Exile.
I ain't gonna lie, like as a moderator of this panel, I moderated some panels before, but y'all different. You know, y'all if I didn't know anything about solitary confinement, or my level of awareness wasn't high, listening to y'all talk about these things and these issues and connecting the dots, touching my spirit and my soul. You're making me want to go vote or something. Like you're making me want to be engaged in the community because y'all laying it on me right now. And so in the poem, he referenced like the doctor and other staff members. Eddie, talk to us about corrections culture. Like, can you discuss the corrections culture, right? Like how does that show up and impact folks?
The correctional culture. Man, a lot of people that work in corrections now pretty much are trying to get an easy check. I've been in units where they usually have two officers. Most of the time, they're sitting down behind their desk, they're looking on their phones, doing something or whatever, and don't really care about what's going on. But once again, the way they were trained, as soon as there's an incident, their first response is to hit the body alarm, even when the incident is not that serious. But that's the training that they have doesn't. That's what I'm looking for. The training that they have does not equip them to deal with those individuals or with those emotions that that person is having. A lot of times within the system, they use you're getting too close. So it's always, you got to distance yourself from the inmate. To have a caring conversation and say, yo, what's wrong with you today? That's unacceptable. You're getting too close to the inmate, So yeah, I think it has to do a lot with the training compared to the training that they have in Germany and so on. They equip you with that. In the United States, they don't.
Evie, same question. Like corrections culture, what comes up for you?
A lot comes up for me, and working on the inside, I certainly have the privilege to witness the impact of this on both sides. And I would say that everyone is a victim of the system, even staff that work there. And there certainly is a culture. I could give so many stories, but I once had someone tell me that I shouldn't smile whenever I go in to a wing. And I smiled and was like, okay, but I'm going to. But I guess what I could say more about that is, especially in what's called close management, CM, which is isolation. Everyone is coming to the dorm, all the service providers, and they do have education, they have mental health, they have classification, they have all kinds of people providing these services. But I would liken it to kind of like a delivery person, like a paper route, because they have so many people to see. There's not a lot of time, and there's a lot of things that can get in the way of services. So it becomes sort of like a check in the box, how you doing? You good? Okay, move along. And unfortunately, that is not helpful or effective, and it leads to what he was saying in that poem of like, the doctor's telling me about me, and he's not even really trying to connect with me or get to know me in any way. And so it's very dismissive, really, because there's a lot of pressure on the staff side to just get it done, especially with mental health. It becomes a triage situation where the people that need the most help or are a danger to themselves or someone else, they're the ones getting the attention and the help. And I've even seen it where every officer in that dorm is working with one incarcerated individual because he's not able to regulate himself. And so that takes all the resources that are available, thus leaving anyone else that's there to provide services, they're not able to do it. So it's a challenge on both sides. And it's one of those things, like it's nobody's fault, but it's everyone's responsibility, and especially that of the staff side. They're responsible for doing what they need to do to provide effective services, and it just doesn't happen because the resources aren't there. It's a big topic.
Definitely appreciate that. Evie. Cal, how do you feel about corrections culture and experience? I know you have a direct experience in it.
Well, for me, I believe it's like you either have two paths. You're gonna treat people normally, or you're gonna be on a power trip. Because there's some CEOs in there that it's a job. They laugh with you, they joke with you. I had one CEO, he would make sure he was good. He'll really check in with you. And then other ones where they just like, they'll wake you up just to tell you you're not coming out yourself for the day. Or you may have a bad day and look at them wrong, so now you lose rec for the evening. Just certain things like that. So it's like, you like the kind of CO you are will determine what kind of time you have in jail. If you're good, If you're regular to everybody, even if, not saying people should just disrespect you, but if you're not disrespecting no one, most people just leave you be like how they are outside.
I appreciate that, Kelton. So Cameron, Caprice. So like I know Kelton, Evie, and Eddie like have experience, like direct experience, like on the inside of these facilities, right? I don't know if either one of you've actually been inside a facility, but I kind of want to ask you the same question, but kind of flip it a little bit for both of you. Does corrections culture in like do that culture like into our schools? Like, do you guys have experience with like correction cultures inside of the school system? Right? Like, is that a thing? Does it happen?
Yeah,
Or
it does.
well,
Actually,
go ahead,
oh,
Capri.
sorry. Sorry. In the eighth grade, y'all, I promise I'm not a bad kid. Promise I'm not a bad kid. But in eighth grade, I had a fight on a school bus, and instead of them calling like the dean of the school, or instead of them calling like my mama and the principal, they called the police on us. And mind you, we're in middle school, so no older than 13 years old. They called the police. So I feel like that how like it enters the school like that. And one time, okay, I went to my high school. Yeah, they called the police. My high school was technically a freedom school. It closed down now. Like, but when you think of freedom school, you think of my high school. But my middle school was a traditional public school, and anything that they felt like was out of their control or like, but I don't see how a fight between girls is out of their control, anyways. But anything they felt like was too much for them, they'll instantly call the police. And if you ever been to New Orleans East, you know if a resident calls police for a crime, they're taking hours. But when it comes down to the school and like people fighting in the school, police is pulling up in 5 minutes.
Cameron, what about that? Do you corrections culture and what's your take on that?
I wouldn't necessarily say I have a particular take, but I do want to say like what in that poem, one thing that really stood out to me. I wouldn't necessarily say that like I'm a vegan, right? But I don't eat like beef or nothing like that. But in the video he was saying stuff like how he was in jail, and he was missing hugs, hot dogs, and picnics. And it resonated with me because it's just like, I take advantage of the things on the outside of the prison walls every day. I get to pick and choose what I want to eat and what I not want to eat. But if the roles was reversed and I was in that situation, let alone I haven't eaten beef in years, but being in that situation, just I would be mouth watering for a hamburger, a hot dog too, So I it just resonates with me very. Yeah, I don't even know how to continue that. It's really just sad to see like that youth my age who want to enjoy the simple pleasures in life that I see as just regular things can't because of simple mistakes.
And I appreciate that, Cameron. Just like again, like we see the same tactics in different environments, right? So in schools, instead of calling it solitary confinement, they may call it a different name, like in school suspension or something like that, right? And then they give it these fancy names, but do use the exact same tactics. And in my high school, it was zero tolerance policies, right? Like the principal walk in the cafeteria, raise his hand. That means be quiet. And if you don't be quiet, you get 5 days at the house, right? And like Kelton said after if a correctional officer, if you made the wrong look, then you lose your privileges to go outside and stuff like that. Like same tactics, they call it different things. And it's happening inside the school system, and it's also happening to our folks who are behind bars who are incarcerated. And so it's
Can
good to
I?
make. Go ahead, Evie.
Sorry, can I add something? You just made
Of
me think
course,
of something
of course.
about getting in trouble for simple mistakes, and it just reminded me of the level of authority and power that COs and staff have. It's kind of up to the individual to decide whether or not someone's crossed a line. So one of the infractions is disrespect, and how someone views disrespect can vary greatly. And so people can go to confinement or have privileges revoked for disrespect, which could be looking at someone a certain way or saying a certain thing. And that is it's difficult to navigate that. And just there being so many officers, that changes, those rules change, and the way we see it changes depending on who you're speaking to. Even if someone doesn't intend to disrespect somebody, if it's perceived that way by an officer, they get the final say.
Just like you say, Evie, they get the final say, and again, it shows up and it looks different depending on the environment you're in. But the same tactics are being used. And in my case, in my school, was willful disobedience. It was the only thing that they had to write on the referral to get you sent home for days. And so that power, like you said, that power dynamic is real. And even why I have you, because you're dropping these jewels, art therapy, right? And so we know, like, facilities use programming, right, to help alleviate the different things that are happening inside of those facilities, and art therapy is one. Can you talk to us more about that?
Sure. So like I said, I've been working in the system for 5 years. And I will say, even though we are a far cry from where we need to be in corrections, just my presence being inside is evidence of positive change. And so there are things that are happening. And I see the work that I do to be very valuable in this setting specifically, both with open population and long-term isolation, but especially with long-term isolation, because it provides an outlet for authentic self-expression where they may not have had that opportunity in other times of their life, and especially while they're incarcerated, because artwork provides a container for heavy emotions and difficult experiences that are really common within the correctional environment. And it's not typically socially appropriate to express these emotions in this environment, because the perception is that those emotions, sadness, loneliness, they're a sign of weakness, and it can leave people vulnerable in that setting. And oftentimes they're not paired with providers that are even able to hear all of these emotions. Like I said, the time is so limited. And so even mental health providers that are working in that department don't have the opportunity to spend an entire, what would typically be, 50, 60 minutes with a therapist. But with this program, it has more flexibility because we are couched under the education department and we work with individuals working towards their GED. There is much more flexibility because we are not crisis intervention. This is more about, let's create some space so you can focus on your education. Because if you've been in a stressful situation, you're not concerned about what grade you're getting on a test. And to expect someone to focus on school, do their homework, turn their work in consistently, communicate with the teacher about what's going on and what they need. Meanwhile, they're dealing with all of these environmental stressors that are so difficult. Even just hearing stories, I completely understand. Like, I get it. You didn't do your homework. That's okay. You're going through a lot. But art making, when I do have time to work with someone individually, we do create art together. Art making in itself is a mindful activity. So it helps to channel that energy and that emotion on just this present moment and just what I can control, because most of what they experience is outside of their control. And it also provides a window into the felt experience of what they're going through, which provides them an opportunity to then explain their artwork and understand it on a deeper level, because imagery is something we all understand, and it speaks much louder and much clearer than verbal communication does sometimes. So that, in a nutshell, is a little bit of that.
No, definitely appreciate it. And I think for me, what I hear you saying, even Eddie and Kelton, like the fact that you have this understanding, like you could tell when folks see people's humanity regardless of like the environment and conditions that they like. You understand, like, if something happens, you're not going to care about turning in grade. Like, you could be very punitive in that powder, like, no, well, actually I just only care about this, I don't care about that stuff. But you don't take that approach. And so I just want to ask Kelton, Evie, and Eddie a quick question for you three. Kelton, Eddie, I know you experience this directly. Evie, I know you're on the inside. How important is relationship building and building trust with people like do that? Is that a thing? Does it matter when you're like Evie? I know you're working with folks, but Eddie and Kelton, like you are like in there, like it's relationship building and building trust with people. Like is that like a does it matter? Like is it a thing? Does it help alleviate stress? Like is that so? Kelton, I'll start with you. Does that
Mhm.
matter? Like you know, having staff who understand you and that you're able to talk to, like is are those things important?
Like personally, it wasn't at the time. I wasn't really trying to talk to staff because it was just I didn't see you like I didn't see COs as an option to talk to. I seen you as can I get something like but I needed a relationship too because I needed to use you. Like say I needed like I wanted something from one cell or I wanted to give something to somebody I know, like give them some food or something. Like COs would sometimes make it like hard for you to do that. So you have to wait till there's lunchtime like to pass stuff around to each other. Or like it was just little minor things that they could that could make or break your day. It was like, are they gonna let me grab something from two cell or give something to four cell, or is it gonna be a whole big argument if they see us pass something? Are we gonna get in trouble for it? So like the relationship, it was more of a it was like I was hoping it was more like a hopeful thing. Like I hope you wasn't trying to be like an asshole for lack of a better word, but it wasn't like I needed you to be my friend or always needed to be good kind of thing.
Got you. They could definitely make or break your day. I definitely heard that. Eddie, how like for you, was is that a that tool? Like, is it does it have any impact? Is it useful from your experience?
So when I first went to jail, you couldn't talk to the police. Talking to the police was like, what are you telling? You're snitching or something. So those interactions, the only interactions you use, as Kelton said, is he gonna let me get this soup from the next cell? Is he gonna pop my door to get a shower because I got back late or something? Uh, the only communication that was important to me and other inmates was with the other inmates, uh, and those are pretty much always negative. Uh, Now, being in the program that I came from, program's been going on for almost 7.5 years. Everything is based on communication. From the minute you enter that program and the welcome committee that welcomes you in, the people that hand you the pamphlets, the people that talk to you one on one, we've learned that that actually works, uh, and it's kind of a model that they have in Germany. But we've created a model here where it's lifers that work with 18 to 25-year-olds, and the connections we've made are invaluable.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that, Eddie. And even you coming in and providing like a service or like doing this program and like, is that a tool that you like lean into more to build relationships with young people? Or are you more like, nah, I'm just gonna like I'm here to provide this service and cut it there? Like, what's your take on that?
The trust in that relationship is so important, and I can't stress that enough. And I hear over and over again that what you two have said, like, that is the experience. They're not trying to make meaningful, trusting connections with staff, especially. And with other incarcerated people, it's usually not there either. Most people are in survival mode. And so their primary goal is just to make sure that their needs are met. But in this situation, with using the art and facilitating these services and providing that trusting relationship, it can foster a connection, not even so much with other people or with me, even. It's about fostering a connection with themselves first and foremost, because people lose themselves and lose touch with who am I, what am I here for, who do I want to be, what is my place in this world. And you do that by being present and attending to your thoughts and emotions. And so it's not about me, it's about them understanding that. And the art provides that place for exploration that is safe. And I think being someone that can provide that, it helps to facilitate those connections with themselves.
Definitely appreciate that, Evie. And so I want to move us into the next part of our conversation where we talk about the best ways to address these problems, starting with policy, right? I want to talk about the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. And before I get into the question, I want you to think about this question while I just kind of give a little background about what the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act is. Think about how the implementation or lack of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act implementation affected Kalief's story. So I want you to think about that while I give this background, so we can dialogue about that. So the JJDPA first passed in 1974. It was a federal law aimed at protecting youth in the justice system by setting standards for care and treatment, including reducing youth incarceration and focusing on prevention and rehabilitation. And remember, we're thinking about Kalief Browder and the young people that we advocate for, our personal stories. We think about all that while we're listening to this, right? So it was supposed to help reducing youth incarceration and focus on prevention and rehabilitation. And four core components of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act is deinstitutionalization of status offenders, sight and sound, separation of juveniles from adults in institutions, and we heard that came up early in our conversation. Removal of juveniles from adult jails and lockups, and the last one is addressing racial and ethnic disparities. Right, that's what the Juvenile Justice Act, the Delinquency Prevention Act, was supposed to do. Right, those four core things. Right, and so when we think about Kalief Browder's story, how does this act that's a federal law come into play? So we think about Kalief Browder and we think about the implementation of this act or lack thereof. Um, what comes to mind? What feelings come up for folks? Like when we think about this act, this law that exists, and we still have Kalief, stories like Kalief Browder's that happens. And so I'm going to pass it to Kaprice. Kaprice, if you want to start, I love when you do that. I love when your eyes get big because I know you got so many ideas for us. You about to just drop jewels on us. What comes to mind when you think about this act, right? That says, well, young people are not supposed to be in prisons with adults, right? We want to decrease youth incarceration. We want to address the racial and ethnic disparities in our system. Like this law says these things, right? And then you see in the story of Kalief Browder, like from personal experience, your family. What comes to you? What comes to mind when you think about this law and how it's implemented and what it could do or what it don't do? Whatever you think, educate
Yeah,
us.
I feel like this goes back to my comment earlier on how policy is implemented and how legislation can be passed, but like not actually implement at the same time. Most people like laws like this are very vague. Like to us, to people who actually are system impacted, we know what they're supposed to mean, but they have so many loopholes and whirlwinds in them. So people who are over these systems directly, like in these systems impacting youth, can like maneuver around them. And I also feel like we see people stories like Kalief Brown, but also stories like I know friends and family of incarcerated youth in Louisiana. We had a big meeting and discussion last year on a group of kids being in Angola and a group of kids being in adult prisons. So it's like all these bills and legislations are passed and we still have federal trials and federal court cases where we're trying to get these kids out of adult prisons. So it's like on one hand the legislation is passed, but it's like what is the legislation actually doing?
So I want to. So Cameron, when you hear about this act, when you hear about this law that's on the books, been on the books since 1974, that says we shouldn't be putting young people in adult jails. And I think you're from Louisiana, right, Cam? You're from Louisiana, okay? And so I know, like Kaprice said, you know how those kids got moved to Angola, one of the worst adult prisons in the country, right? Thinking about that, thinking about Kalief Browder, like like how does this make you feel when you think about this act that exists and like how it's working and what's happening with that?
Yeah, like how you said before, that one of the four components is addressing racial and ethnic disparities, but yet we see that the intersectionality of it all, that it's a majority of black and brown men, youth who are incarcerated in the system, and if they're so-called addressing these racial and ethnic disparities, then how come we're still having such a high rate of this intersectionality? And oh, I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, this also kind of just reminds me, like how Kaprice was saying, how we have an act and it's not being fully implemented, because we see that as in Louisiana as well, because Louisiana has an act that's Act 1225, that is act basically saying that we want to take the funding out of youth prisons and put them into community resources, and to move youth from adult prisons and closing youth prisons, and to move them more into community based type of programming. But and yet we do have those that act that's in place, but yet it's not being implemented. And even though that is just a Louisiana example, that can also be a seen across the country with other acts and other boards, such as the one that we're talking about right now with the four core components. But yet we still see, even though it's saying one thing, we're still seeing the effects of the exact opposite of what it's saying that it's supposed to be doing. So it's one thing to have all these great acts, but it's another thing to actually implement them effectively.
Eddie, what's coming up for you when you hear about this law, this act that's been on the books since 1974? We still, having situations like we had with Kalief Browder happening so many years later.
So, how many Kalief Browns were there before the Kalief Brown was brought into light? Uh, the juvenile to adult prisons. Juvenile shouldn't be for me. Juvenile shouldn't be in prison. Period. Uh, so when you say juvenile systems, one of the things I think of is the people that are being hired are the same people that are being hired for an adult prison. So, like, for juveniles, there should be social workers, not a correctional staff member that should be working. It shouldn't be a building that's separated. One's an adult, one's a juvenile, but yet you have the prison guard guarding the juvenile also. Juveniles' brains are growing. Prison guards are not equipped to help them grow. So yeah, I see a lot of problems with it. I really don't know where to start. It's crazy.
Now, definitely, Evie, what comes up for you when you hear about this act that's been passed?
It brings up a lot of questions for me. For one, I wasn't aware of this act, but I do see it a little bit on the inside. They have what's called YO programs, or youthful offender programs, where people under the age of 22 are technically 18 in a lot of cases, are housed together, and they're separated from the adult population. And there's a lot of rules around when they can move and how they can move, and making sure that the sight and sound piece is in place. So it does happen, and I don't know the intricacies of this. So this brings in the piece of like awareness and visibility as well, because it's one thing to have the law and then it's another to implement it, like you were saying before. So I don't know all the details, but from what I understand, that status can be revoked in certain situations, which would allow them then to be sent here or there, or to isolation and that kind of thing. And this speaks to the injustice that takes place, because I like the phrase, like, whoever holds the pen holds the power, because it comes down to whoever is filling out the documentation and making sure that sounds as it should, then they're the ones that are making it look good, but in reality it's not actually happening that way. And that's where we really need to get really clear about what is actually happening, and what is the gap between the ideal, which is implementing these rules and expectations when it comes to young adults in prison and what is actually happening on the ground floor. So there's a lot of disparities there.
Absolutely. Kelton, same question for you. Do you see any positives like with having legislation like this being passed, right? Like with with having legislation like this on the books, are there any, like, in your opinion, is it positive for folks to, is this like moving the needle in the right, was this legislation moving the needle in the right direction? And also, how do you feel about it being on the books, but maybe not being fully implemented?
I think it depends on who you asking to determine if it's going on in the right direction. I don't think it's moving in the right direction for the incarcerated people, but from people that think they understand incarceration outside of really learning incarceration, maybe to them it makes sense because like some things seem like to work out for like in theory, but then when you put it into practice, you just see all the flaws and stuff. But like I guess like I don't want to blame fault people for trying to do better either, or trying to move the bar in the right direction, even if it's still misguided. Like I want to like try to educate you versus like tear you down, versus if that makes sense.
Nah, definitely. I definitely understand what you're saying. And
Can I jump in?
yep, you absolutely could. This conversation.
Oh my god. Okay, so Kelton, this is so wild. I was just in, so nerd of me anyways, but I was in class yesterday and they assigned, my professor assigned, oh y'all can't see because of the background, but my professor assigned this article called Theory as Liberatory Practice by Bell Hooks, and it's exactly what you just said, Kelton. How academics or people go to school for these things but haven't actually been impacted or directly encountered these activities, so they write about them and they do stuff that's good in practice, but I mean good in theory, but whole time the practice is not there. Like they don't match their words up with their actions literally, so now we're left to people who actually are impacted and actually practicing it, and then like it goes vice versa because there's people who are practicing and like living these lifestyles but don't have the theory to prove that they're living these lifestyles, and there's people who have the theory and the money and the academics to prove whatever to prove what these theories and back these theories up, but it's like no intersection, they're not overlining and connecting.
That's a great point. I love how like that distinction is being made when you talk about folks who are not directly impacted, and like I love that, and I think that's a real conversation, right? And I think it goes back to the work that we do, how we want to center directly impacted people at the center of the work in order to move forward, and not believe we're making decisions on behalf or in the best interest of, and actually hearing from the people directly impacted. And so it takes me into the next part of our conversation, the growing movement to end youth incarceration, right? I want to pass this to Eddie. I think Eddie has something for us that he wants to share with everyone. So, Eddie, you have the floor.
Let's see. So, so this is something that me and 9 other mentors wrote. It was a collaboration. Uh, the Vera Institute of Justice asked us about the space that we created within Cheshire Correctional Facility, where lifers work with 18 to 25-year-olds. And after 3 months, we came up with a piece which kind of describes the space. And it goes a little something like this. So we started this with 3 words before we wrote the piece. And the 3 words that we used was, first one is trauma, an emotional shock that creates substantial and lasting damage to the psychological development of an individual. The second word, promise, a sign of future excellence or success, to pledge or offer assurance. And the third word, humanity, the quality, condition, or fact of being human. The quality of being humane is characterized by kindness, mercy, and compassion. What does restoring promise look like? Imagine a world without violence. Impossible. Imagine a little pocket of space in a world without violence. Plausible. In the true unit, see the impossible realized. For 7 years, 8 months, and 20 days, lifers, young adults, and DOC staff have coexisted within a prison space in the absence of violence. Prison is a trauma site. Prisons are filled with individuals who existed in traumatizing social conditions and continue to do so. Poverty, crime, institutional racism, exposure to violence, and victimization create real trauma. The symptoms of those traumas manifest themselves through violence because of the nature and structures of prisons. Confined in a cell, locked away with one's traumas, the thought of being vulnerable to a cellmate is inconceivable. As a human in prison, displays of compassion, love, empathy, consideration, caring, giving lead one to be preyed upon. These are signs of weakness. Compassion becomes an opportunity for exploitation inside a space with limited resources. The tools needed to effectively deal with the trauma are taken from us. The threat of violence makes us fear expressing our trauma. As a prisoner, we become hardened by this environment. Our skin's calcifying, locking us in a state of trauma-induced shock. We reimagine the prison space into a true therapeutic community. Everyone in the community, mentors, mentees, and staff come together to participate in discussion groups, sporting events, community events, programs, and community gatherings to create a space that allows a safe expression of humanity. Lifers are now mentors and young adult mentees. A humanizing relationship forms inside these new roles. Like a trauma surgeon operating without anesthesia, we as mentors begin to cut through the layers to reach the source of the traumas to begin the healing process. The freedom of this space allows the shock to wear off and the pain to be felt. The pain manifests in many forms, and our roles as mentors must adapt to father, uncle, brother, coach, teacher, and even students, as we also learn to deal with our trauma. Living in a unit with mentees, we internalize their pain and we teach them healthy ways to express it. With the tools to articulate their trauma, it no longer manifests into violence, but instead in the form of creativity, compassion, love, and community. The mentees bring this triumph of spirit back to their communities, expanding this small pocket of space, absent of violence, and creating a safer society. As mentors, we exist for promise, the promise to mend the trauma we caused and the trauma of our younger selves. Sincerely, the true mentors. One of the reasons I bring this up is going to prison is a space where everywhere you look at, there's trauma. And there's people surrounding you, there's officers, but take that out the equation and you talk about solitary confinement. Now you make the situation even worse because the communication that you have, the little things that you see, the little things that you hear, the little communication you have with other people is removed. Now, from a prison space experiencing trauma, you're moved into a cell, usually by yourself, and now you don't have the communication. The only communication you have is the yelling and screaming you do to talk to someone else across another cell. And usually those cells are probably damn near airtight. But we find ways to entertain ourselves while we're there. Institutions like prisons are traditional. They don't want to change. They want to keep the status quo. This is how we run our prison. In Cheshire, they call it the Rock because they have a way on how they run things. And while we were building this program within the unit, now there's two, there was many difficulties. Every time we left that unit, we entered general population to go to school, to work, or something else. And you always felt the difference when you went back into population. And then there was people and even officers that worked there started getting the gist like, wow, when I come to work, I don't feel as stressed out anymore, you know? And that's a lot of communication within that unit. But when you talk about isolation or seg, you eliminate that. And now what's going to happen? When those people return to society and then they look at them like pariahs, it's like, well, how do you think they got that way? You know, spaces can be made It's been done in Germany. It's been done in other countries. The United States is starting to head in that direction. We have a long way to go, but I believe that the individuals that are working on these issues have to open up their mind to new ways of doing things, breaking out of that traditional way that they did things before. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Eddie. Definitely appreciate you. Definitely appreciate you for sharing that with us. And just want being able to hear directly from you and get basically pieces of your story, because I know it's so much more to your story that you probably didn't even share with us. But I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being vulnerable in this space and sharing those real lived experiences that I know you carry with you every day that you've had to move through. And so I want to kind of open it up to everyone to talk about, as we talk about the growing movements to end youth incarceration. Um, the and what are the let's talk about strategies. And I want to in that with us just let's talk about strategies to end youth incarceration, to end solitary confinement, to make sure like laws like the JJDPA law that was passed in 1974 actually implemented and being followed by lawmakers and people who are impacted. They have this level of awareness. What movements are happening in your neck of the woods of your hood? What movements are happening in your area that you are a part of that you want to speak to and let us know about? Kelton, I'll start with you. What movements to end youth incarceration are happening in your area, or what movements are happening to do the work around youth justice?
Well, I know like the group that I work with called CTJA, their goal was to get youth, well, just raise the Connecticut arresting age to 14, but they got 12, but it was initially 10. So I know that we work with lobbyists, we're campaigning. I know one of my bosses, she's trying to become friends with, like, or build a friendship with somebody that's a Republican, and she's Democratic. So it's like we're trying to like reach our hands across both sides and find like the common ground and be like, listen, kids in jail is not it. So like if we can all just agree on that generalized statement, we could find a program or find a solution or find something that can, change, get that goal and help achieve it.
Cameron?
Hi. Like I said before, I work with family and friends of Louisiana's incarcerated children out here in Louisiana. One of the ways that we combat this is our campaign, Let Kids Be Kids, which is a campaign that focuses on the 3-point platform of understanding that kids are impacted mentally, educationally, and economically. And also, we're working with Dignity in Schools through their week of action to focus on the school to prison pipe out, school school to prison, school to prison pipeline. So we're working on that with them that week, which is next week. Those are the two things that we're doing right now. I'll pass it to Evie.
I really appreciate the ideas that Eddie presented in his speech about the mentorship program. There are things like that happening. I've seen things at the institutions where I work at where long timers and short timers are getting together and coming up with solutions on the inside. And I really think it takes that as well as partnering with staff to get that piece of support that's needed to really amplify these movements. And that's really what it comes down to, is people on all sides being willing to come together and have these conversations, because there are things that can happen now, little things. And that's what it's going to take, is these little steps in that direction to make those changes that'll eventually bring us to what we're really looking for. And then it comes down to, on a practical side, just resources, more people, more services, more technology, more advancements on the inside. So with all those pieces, I do believe that change is possible, and it is inevitable. It's just a matter of how long is it going to take?
Caprice, um, same question for you, but I also want you to answer an added piece to that question that I'm going to actually go back around and let everybody follow up with. Is how can people get involved with what's happening, with what you're doing? We're gonna go back around and let folks know how they can get more involved um, in the
Okay.
different efforts.
I feel personally like coming as a youth, like still in the early ages of my youth. I'm just 18. So personally, I feel like me and other you can get involved, like Evie said, by start having these conversations, but making these conversations more widespread among you and like more normal. Because I feel like y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but from my neck of the woods, like Antonio called it, people are just going about their day to day lives and going about their day to day lives, surviving, and not actually talking about what's on because like Eddie talked about, it's just considered so rite of passage, so normal. So nobody has that, okay, let's challenge this. If this is normal, then what's heaven? Like how we get out of the normal. And I feel like personally it's having these conversations. That's why I'm always willing to come on. Like when you ask how I'm involved, I am a part of Friends and Family Incarcerated with Friends and Family Incarcerated Youth in Louisiana. But since I'm not active in Louisiana right now, I always do these type of panels, but also like hosting social media campaigns, actually talking about it and getting the youth engaged with it. Um, oh, that answer both. Yeah, that answer both parts of the question.
You did good. You did good, Kelton. How can folks get involved?
Honestly, I think if you're interested, you gotta just do your research because like for me, I was only like know about this because of my experience inside of jail. Like outside of that, I wouldn't have really known about CTJA or any of this or the programming or Unlock the Box. But I never really researched it. But I've learned like ever since I've got a part, I've done the research. Now I know there's 10 youth groups over here. I know there's multi-state youth groups with conferences and stuff. So I think just if your goal is to be a part of it, you just got to do your own research and really like hustle down.
Mm. Evie, how can people get involved?
I would say the fastest way is to look at your community and what sort of advocacy groups are in your area and educate yourself. I mean, all we can do is just what we can and what is right in front of us. So, learning about what needs to be done, what can you do, because there is always something. If it's even if it's just attending events or becoming more aware by um, following this Instagram page, things like
Mhm.
that, just becoming more aware of what is being put out there about this work.
Eddie, how can folks get more involved?
Honestly, it's quite simple. Social media. You have access at the tip of your fingers. You have AIs. If you're passionate about something, if you think something's going wrong in your community, just say it into the Google Voice or whatever, and it'll pop out organizations for you. You know what I mean? Uh, I've been following up every time I meet people. Uh, they pretty much tell me, who they work with, what they do on their spare time, and most of the time I'm like, I get their number, I get their card or something, and I follow up. I go home, I get on social media, and I research it. I go to their web pages. But quite simple, something that you're passionate about, just tell AI, and it'll give you the websites.
Give it to you right, like straight like that. Cameron, how can folks get more involved in the great work that you're doing?
Definitely, I say definitely get involved on a local level within your community. Finding great organizations such as these who are invested in grassroots work and positive youth development. Even when it just comes to us with FLIC in general, if you're in Louisiana, you can always reach out to us on flic.org or any of our social medias at FFLIC. That'll be definitely one way to get involved, but also making sure that you do your research and voting is important too, and making sure that you're putting the right people in place who actually have the that pin that swipes these things that's going on within the court system, because those are the people who appoint judges and your council people who actually have that power. So making sure that you get involved on that level too is important as well.
Okay, so I appreciate everybody for sharing
I'm
what
so
they
sorry,
said.
Antonio.
Go
But
ahead,
to
Capri. Go
second
ahead.
what Cameron said to the youth out there, she's not just talking about voting on the presidential scale. She's talking about voting at every level. Every level matters.
Let them know, Caprice. Let them know. And so what we're gonna do is to close out, right? I'm going to bring us home, but I want to end it with you guys giving people uh, maybe some words of with the people who are going to watch this, the people who are not going to watch this. If you could leave them with something, I want you to be thinking about that while I kind of close this whole thing out for us, and we're gonna end it that way. But I do want to thank unlock the Unlock the Box campaign, and I do want to thank the coalition, You First Coalition, No More Prisons coalition that we're a part of, for organizing this and putting this whole thing on. And if you wanted to follow up on Unlock the Box, the national campaign against solitary confinement, you can go to unlocktheboxcampaign.org. That's unlocktheboxcampaign.org. You can check them out if you wanted to get more information around the great work that they're doing, who also help facilitate and organize this great event. I don't see it as a woman named Jane. I think I met her before. She do great work and did a great job of helping put this whole thing together. We want to thank, we want to, shout out our sponsor, the Juvenile Justice, the JJDPA, for also sponsoring this and helping put this on, and helping allow this conversation to happen with everybody. I'm Antonio Travis. I've been moderating this whole thing with these great folks. I want to model our closeout. And if I could leave people with any words of wisdom or anything, is to always move with an open heart and an open mind, um, and be ready to be uncomfortable. And this is for everybody who's going to watch this. Um, be willing to be uncomfortable, because change can be very uncomfortable, and reimagine and rethink what you think. Everything does not have to look like the status quo or what you're accustomed to. Think outside of the box, reimagine it, unlock the box, and we'll be able to move forward. You see, like that, Cam? See how I did that? Unlock the box thing. Yeah. So if we do all those things, I think we can we could really help move the needle forward and get things done the way that we want to do. So just remember, if you want to tap in like everybody else said, and then I'm going to pass it to Caprice to share some words of wisdom to help close us out, and then we're gonna just keep batoning to everybody till everybody closes out, and then we're gonna Wakanda. Caprice, give us some words of wisdom.
Get involved. I think so often it's easier to run away from the problem and act like if we just continue with the everyday life that the problem is going to change in itself, like the system is going to change. But we have to start acknowledging the simple fact that just because we want the system to change, the people who built the system doesn't want the system to change. It's making them millions of trillions of dollars. Like, they love us just acting ignorant to it. They love us acting like the system fits for us because it literally fits for them. But as we can see in our households and our friends and our families, like, it doesn't fit for us. And if something doesn't fit for you, you, like Antonio said, we have to start getting uncomfortable with the change in order to imagine that better future. And I was reading Tani, butchering his name, so sorry about that. Tanishi Kalahasi Coates yesterday, and one of his interviews, he said that he quoted Ida B. Wells, and he was like, she fought to change legislation all her life. Is it Are we going to consider ourselves failure just because something didn't change in our lifetime? Are we going to continue to thrive and push for that change because we want future generations to have that change? Like, I think so often we get caught up in okay, it's like this to me, but oh well, like that just happened to me. But we have to think about the generations that's coming after us, and we have to be the role models and the change makers we want to see in order for the movements to continue. Ooh, that was a lot.
Cameron, give us some words of wisdom.
That youth voices matter, and we should definitely listen to them and amplify them. I'll pass it to Kelton.
Uh, I was thinking that like a lot of youth in jail where I'm from call home being like the world. So it's like we're isolated to a point where we feel like we're not even in the same place as someone who isn't in jail. And I just think just the concept of we're somewhere else, even though we're really just down the street, we gotta really work on that. No,
Eddie?
pass it.
If I could leave anybody with anything, it would be, I would use me as an example. I was one of them kids, I went through Hartford detention, MYI, Long Lane, lockups, prison. As the judge said when he locked me up, you have no redeeming qualities. Today, I proved them wrong. Don't give up. Don't give up on anybody. The science says it. It's been there. It's been there for a long time. It's just now getting out. Kids make bad decisions, and they're not the worst mistake that they ever made. It takes one person to change a person's life. It takes a village to empower long-lasting change. Don't give up. Change is possible. I had a 60-year sentence, and I did 32 years and 9 months. I've been out 6 months. I'm in college right now studying to be a social worker, and I'm working in policy and communication. I work with nonprofits now, and looking back, I wish I had that community, that positive community to talk to. Unfortunately, the negative community is the one that affected me, But for everybody out there, change is possible. It ain't one of those things where you're locked in. So that's it.
Evie, what you have for us?
I would say that regardless of whether or not you are aware, everyone is impacted by this topic and everyone has a role and responsibility in it. And change is possible, like Eddie said, and all it takes is for you to look right around you and see what you can do right in front of you.
And on that note, just to bring us all home, y'all heard us talk about solitary confinement and how that impacts us. Y'all heard us talk about an act that was passed, the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, was passed in 1974, and then we're talking about what happened to Kalief Browder. And like Eddie said, so many Kalief Browders before that and after that, that happened, right? And we've seen our panelists brought everything home. Evie goes inside the facilities and offers programming to our young people that's essential in helping their brains circulate and be creative, right? Kelton experienced this on the first hand, and Eddie experienced this on the first hand, right? And all of the different dynamics that happens within the system. Kaprice has been affected by family, and she's out trying to do the good work to make sure our kids are not in solitary confinement. And then we're fighting to end it. Cameron's doing the same thing. Let's end solitary confinement. It doesn't work. Let's put the money in our communities. Let's pass laws, implement laws, and follow the laws, right? And continue to raise awareness around these laws. And remember, this is all a part of YJAM Youth Justice Action Awareness Month that we're doing this in partnership with. But Unlock the Box and the coalition that we're part of, Youth First and No More Prisons, help put this on, sponsored by the JJDPA. And so, with all that being said, I appreciate everybody on the panel. We're going to close this out. I hope everybody watching this gets something from it. Wakanda forever.
Thank you.